Today we're talking about developer's block to try to identify causes of it, some ways to prevent it, and to discuss how to get rid of it once it's there. As always, my name's BanTech and I'll be your host for this journey. So let's explore Beyond the Blox. Hello and welcome to Beyond the Blox, the podcast all about the Roblox platform and game development. On this episode, we're unpacking the topic of developer's block, when you struggle to continue working due to a lack of motivation or passion for the project, or you simply run out of ideas. Let's begin by looking at some potential causes. I started developing games on Roblox 9 years ago and spent 5 years as a freelance web developer, so I've experienced my fair share of blocks. I've put together a list after adding a few extra stories from Twitter and the developer forum, and although a lot of the reasons and solutions could apply to many creative roles, this episode focuses very much on game development, and some solutions are Roblox specific. I found that developer's block can be caused by being inexperienced. It's too difficult and you don't know how to achieve what you're dreaming of, or perhaps it takes too long and you feel like you'll never finish, so why even bother? It could also be due to you being uninspired. You ran out of ideas and don't know what to do next. Being distracted can also be a factor where you know exactly what to do, but suddenly everything else is more interesting. Another idea might have popped into your head and you want to start that now before you forget it. Or if you're doing school or homework, exams might get in the way, and by the time you finish those, you've lost all momentum on the project. Being actively dissuaded can also be a factor. Negative comments might have gotten to you and you've fallen out of love with your game. Or perhaps people off-platform, family, friends, school, they don't see it as a legitimate job. You could also be annoyed by your team. Other team members could be working slow or dealing with their own block, or perhaps they could be promising things that are never delivered. Or perhaps you're being overpressured. Your game has lots of players and suddenly you're worried about breaking it or ruining it, so you don't want to touch it. Or perhaps you've been hyping something up and realise that the final product might not be so good. Roughly half of these reasons I've experienced myself, and others are from stories that I've been told on Twitter and the developer forum. So we're going to break these down and come up with ideas for how to avoid them. If we look at the idea of being inexperienced, what does that mean? I categorized it as developer's block that arises because you don't know how to achieve something, or it's taking too long to achieve it in your opinion. This can be hugely demoralizing, particularly if it happens more than once on a project and it can quickly kill your passion, but it doesn't have to. Be aware of your own skills and your limitations. A lot of practice is required to be able to turn an idea into reality. You'll see a lot of developers on Twitter and in various showcase servers making small assets or small bits of code that might do one job very well, but were never intended to go into a game or become anything bigger. You can call them demos or tests, whatever you like, but it allows the developer to learn new skills and become familiar with ones they already have. If you're finding it tough to create a whole game at once, perhaps little mini projects is the way to go to build your confidence and your armory of skills. It could also help improve your speed. You can use resources like the Developer Hub and the Developer Forum when you get stuck. The Developer Hub, or the wiki as some people might refer to it, is very much a self-help reference with tutorials and articles on a wide range of game development topics. Even experienced developers will come back to the hub frequently to remind themselves of certain API when scripting or for tips when building. The forum, on the other hand, is a combination of self-help and actively asking for help. You can search existing, resolved topics to try to find your issue, and if there's nothing of use, you can create your own topic, asking for help. Just be sure to describe your problem and any attempts you've made so far. The forum is a community with a mix of experience and a mix of personalities. Don't be afraid that people will judge you on your attempts, as I can guarantee whatever level you're at, there's people of both higher and lower skill level on there. If the project is still too big or complex and is taking too long to complete on your own, consider working in a team. Find some people on the forum or on Twitter who are interested in your project's theme and goal, and bring together a team of different skill bases. If you're a master builder but really struggling with the scripting, bring on someone who lives and breathes scripting. Some of their skill will rub off on you as you work together and talk about what they've done, and you'll hopefully avoid losing motivation. Being uninspired can be frustrating and confusing. Am I broken? How do all these front-page games come up with these amazing ideas? Am I just not cut out for game development? You might ask yourself these questions when you run out of ideas and you don't know where to take your project next. Perhaps you started with a really cool building or system, but didn't really have a plan of how to incorporate that into a game people would want to play. So what now? You could accept that you aren't sure what to do with it and sell it or give it away. Your asset might fit perfectly into somebody else's game, and if you sell it, you could earn some cash too. Perhaps start thinking about going into asset development rather than trying to create a whole game. If you've got the skills to create, but are struggling for ideas of what to do with it, let other people pay you to make their idea come true. If you're set on making a game, then take some time to play other games on the platform, and as you're playing, ask yourself, what makes you want to keep playing? What makes you want to leave and never come back? The more games you play, the better you'll be at spotting patterns and feeling attraction towards certain games. Even if you spend a whole week doing no development and just doing this sort of research, it's not wasted time. It will really help. Get some inspiration from successful projects and pick the elements you like most. Once you've got some ideas, have a planning session to come up with how you might feasibly integrate some of these ideas into your project and prioritize them. When you're ready to jump back into Studio, work through that priority list, getting the core features in first. If your project is already live and has players or users and you're struggling to come up with what features you want to add to keep them interested, ask them. Your players are a valuable resource and they often know what they want. Just be sure to listen to a large sample size before making any major changes to the gameplay to ensure you aren't putting off existing players in the pursuit of gaining more. Having a suggestion system with up and down votes can help you to make those decisions. Distractions come in all shapes and sizes, but what do you do when they start holding up a project? It's easy to say, just ignore it, but some distractions are genuine. For example, another job, school, family and friends, holidays, and more. So how can you organise your time to allow for distractions without losing momentum on your project? Imagine you know exactly what to do and where to go, but suddenly everything else in life is more interesting. A TV show you love is back on Netflix and you want to binge it. You get sucked down a rabbit hole on YouTube and days go by without writing a single line of code. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Reddit, all demanding your attention all day, every day. It's time to focus. Self-discipline is one of the hardest skills to keep up. I try to organise my time to make a clear split between work time and free time using Google Calendar. I'll create meetings like watch TV and check social media as discrete blocks of time dedicated to that activity. If I'm tempted to do them in the middle of work, I remember that there's plenty of time already set aside later for those, so I'll get this work done first. I do this with nearly all activities, including eating, practicing an instrument, and seeing friends. It both stops my work from distracting me from these other things, and it stops those other things from distracting me from doing work. Distractions don't have to be outside of Roblox though, there's plenty here to distract you too. Perhaps another idea has popped into your head and you want to start that now before you forget it. I think this is quite common, particularly if you have a lot of ideas, so here's a few things that I personally do to stop this from taking over. I have a Trello that's bursting at the seams with ideas, several boards with several lists full of ideas. Some of them might come to fruition, others might never go any further, but they're all there, and once I've written them down I can clear them from my mind and carry on with what I was doing. Eventually I might give away the idea or work on it when I have some time, or after leaving it for a while and coming back to it, I find that the idea sounded cool at the time but wouldn't really work in practice. It therefore serves two purposes. It allows me to focus on the current project, and it allows me to properly review the potential ideas before committing to anything. Suggestions for my existing games are only accepted via my website, and they must be voted on by players before coming to me for review. I review them in my own time instead of in real time. A great distraction can be if you're receiving hundreds or thousands of wonderful and interesting ideas that you would love to implement, but you can't do them all at once. It's important to have a filter to allow you the time to work on the current task uninterrupted, and then you can grab the next task from the hopper when the time is right. Work on projects that you are passionate about. If you're working on it because there was nothing else to work on, then of course a better idea is going to snatch your attention very easily. If you're going to work on a project you aren't too fussed about, then treat it as practice and accept that you might not finish it. If you're at school, homework or exams can get in the way, and by the time you finish those you've lost all momentum on the project. In this case it's all about time management. Like earlier with my personal activities such as watching TV, you want to split your working time into school and game development, or between projects if you're working on more than one. Priority calls have to be made sometimes to focus on one piece of work if a deadline is approaching, but the trick is being able to resume your work once that's complete. That's where the block can occur. If I ever find it tough to go back to a project after taking a pause, I'll read over the concept again. Perhaps look at my ideas lists or planned features to get my head back into the game. Sometimes that self-discipline needs to kick back in and give you the initial push, but once you're back in, it's easier to keep going. Next up we have dissuasion, the opposite of persuasion. A number of things can cause this one, but thankfully I haven't experienced much of it myself. It's where you get actively put off development either because your work is unappreciated and negative comments can cause you to fall out of love with the project, or perhaps people in your life such as family and friends don't recognise Roblox development as a legitimate job and tell you that you're wasting your time. So what exactly do you do in this situation? Well, the easiest to say and the hardest to do is to ignore them. It's probably not the best idea long term, but if there's one negative comment per 100 good comments on your game, ignoring it is better than letting it get to you. If it's a bit more of a tie between good and bad, try not to take it personally and actually speak to some of the negative commenters about what they don't like and what they would want to see improved. This might spawn some new ideas that could benefit all players. Sometimes it can also be due to the way that you're marketing your game. If players expect one thing and get another, then of course they'll be disappointed. Look into whether your marketing is truly aimed at the correct audience. For example, if you attract a load of role players into a game that doesn't allow roleplay, expect negative feedback. Of course, these solutions don't solve the family and friends issue so easily. Maybe they don't understand what Roblox is, the opportunities it provides, and the skills that you can develop here. And if you're in it as a job, explain that features like Developer Exchange or DevX for short to show that you can genuinely earn money doing something that you love. They probably think that they have your best interests at heart, even if it doesn't seem like it. If you can understand why they feel that game development isn't a good choice for you, perhaps you can convince them otherwise. I do think dissuasion is the most difficult cause of developer's block to prevent, but the key point is to step back and ask yourself why you're working on this project. You'll never satisfy every single player, and you'll never impress every single person you meet. Being annoyed by your team members can lead to a very quick loss of motivation and sometimes complete abandonment of a project. Other team members might be working at a different pace to you or could even be dealing with their own developer's block. But if the project gets held up for too long, distractions start kicking in and other projects might start looking more attractive. Whether you're a team leader or just a member of a team, there are some things you can do. From the onset, you need a good team. Clear roles, similar experience, and similar skill levels across the team, but focused in different areas. If you're stepping on each other's toes or one person is carrying another, the working relationship will quickly fade. Each member needs a clear role, and ideally their work should be able to be completed without the work of other team members. It can all be integrated at the end. If there's too much reliance on passing things back and forth between team members, even a small slip can spell trouble. Communication of requirements is absolutely key. For example, if the scripter needs the building to be in a specific hierarchy and specific grouping, that needs to be communicated to the builder as early as possible to avoid frustration and rework. But what if the other team member promises to have their work done at the agreed time and then fails to deliver? Every team needs a leader who will check in every so often to make sure the work is on track. If something has slipped, the earlier the rest of the team know about it, the sooner you can replan or even help them out. If the first you hear about it is on deadline day, that's when team members can become annoyed and frustrated and don't want to work anymore. It's important to remember that we're all human and things do come up, but communicating about it is what makes a successful team. Next time you feel annoyed by a team member, have a chat with them and ensure you're both clear on your expectations. It could be as simple as a misunderstanding. Pressure is inevitable. You're one person, your game has thousands or millions or maybe even billions of visits. Your Discord server is blowing up and you can't keep track of all the messages, and you feel like you have no idea what you're doing. What if the next update breaks the game and you lose all of your players? Which feature should you prioritize first? And what if they don't like it? These feelings, these questions, they're totally natural. As the game developer, you put yourselves into the shoes of the players, and there will always be some players who don't like something. In game development, we have to work with majorities or you'd never make anything, so let's go over a few options. If you're worried the game might break and you'll lose some players, then the single biggest piece of advice I have is to test everything. Test it again and again in different scenarios with different people on different devices. If you push lots of half-baked, untested updates, your players will get tired. Testing doesn't guarantee that there aren't any issues, but it certainly catches the majority of them. And remember, if an update goes really bad, you can always roll back to a previous version on the place configuration page. I've had to do it once or twice and it's not a nice feeling, but be honest and let your players know what's going on with all the server restarts. Take the time to understand the problem before trying to release that update again. You'll be surprised how resistant your player count can be to things like that. It's certainly not the end of the world, and if your game has good retention, your players will come back once everything is stable. Knowing which features to prioritize first is hard. It should be a combination of what you want to do, what you feel is feasible to do in the time that you have, and if you're taking suggestions from players, you ideally want to focus on things that they've asked for. If those three factors don't agree with each other, then work on the feature that you personally want to work on. If you force yourself to work on something that you don't like, you'll just run into another form of developer's block. For your own mental health, sometimes you have to take a step back and forget about the player count. What about when you've got a new feature or a new game that you've hyped up and drawn lots of attention about? You've made some big promises and now that the release is approaching you realise that the final product might not be as good as you'd hoped. You did your best, but perhaps you got carried away on the hype train. Well, again, it's not the end of the world and it's not necessarily the end of your game. Try getting a small group of testers to try it out and let you know what they think. If they say they'd still play it anyway, then press ahead and perhaps have a list of some of the things you want to incorporate in the future to improve it. If you present this to the players with the update, they'll understand and they'll see the potential. Alternatively, if your testers really didn't like it and you're not happy with the product, then postpone the release. You don't need that pressure, and you can tell your players it's delayed because the quality wasn't right and you'd rather release it properly than need to roll out loads of extra updates to get it to where you want it. I've personally done this a few times and the response is usually positive. People want to play the thing that you've promised them, and if it's a choice between getting a worse version now or getting what you promised them later, most reasonable players choose the latter. So that's my take on a few causes of developers' block and a few ways to overcome them, but I'd like to take a moment to explore the other side of it too. Is developers' block actually a bad thing? Should you even try to overcome it, or is acceptance the correct thing to do? Sometimes it's okay to leave things half-finished and to treat them as practice. Any developing that you do, whether seen through to completion or not, will benefit your skills and your experience. I have plenty of abandoned projects under my belt and I'm pretty comfortable with that. Looking back, I can see why some of them failed, why I didn't keep fighting to keep going, and I'm glad that I chose to focus on more successful concepts that I enjoy more. I think it depends on how you truly feel about the project too. If it's something that you've always loved, then perhaps you'll want to employ the techniques mentioned earlier to keep the project alive. If you weren't too bothered in the first place, then maybe this block was inevitable. As I touched on earlier, not everyone is cut out for developing whole games from scratch. Becoming an asset creator and renting out your skills might be a better career choice for you. If you don't feel like accepting it and still want to push ahead, then here's some final, general advice that I think can help us all to stay focused. Firstly, get a version of your game live as soon as possible to start growing an audience. Work towards a minimum viable product and add more features later. The audience will provide motivation and ideas, and if you monetize early, you should be able to fund the whole project and avoid running out of cash. Secondly, you should work in a team, though keep an eye out for the team-related blocks we mentioned before. Doing everything yourself can take a long time, even if you have all the skills and you can motivate each other. If you're worried about someone judging your skills, then pick team members with different specialties to avoid overlap. And lastly, try to stick to the plans that you've created and identify delays early to allow you to replan. Ignoring or deviating from the plan can lead to a lack of direction and ultimately lost focus. With these ideas and tools to help keep your mind on track and keep the project rolling, hopefully developer's block no longer controls you, and it can become a little bump that you can just easily step over. If you've got your own story of developer's block and how you overcame it, then let me know on Twitter or in the comments on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or follow the podcast to make sure you don't miss any of our future installments. Thank you to everyone who replied on Twitter and the developer forum for submitting your ideas and stories. Beyond the Blox is brought to you by BanTech Systems, a development studio creating interactive games, systems and solutions on Roblox. Find BanTech's profile on Roblox and click through to the BanTech Systems group for more information. Don't forget you can listen to any episode of Beyond the Blox on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and many other popular listening platforms. You'll also find it on the BanTech Systems YouTube channel. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of Beyond the Blox.